pores of whose skin are never specially cleaned, was so strong that I could without any difficulty detect to which community the given being belonged, and even by those odors I could distinguish one being from another. Now, the variety of these specific odors depends upon how long the decomposition of these oily excretions found in the pores of the skin has proceeded. These unpleasant odors, fortunately for them, do not affect them so tormentingly. And they do not affect them because their sense of smell is very slightly developed, and besides this, existing always among these odors, they gradually become accustomed to them. And so, my boy, just this custom, namely of washing themselves periodically in special hammams, was taken by the Russians from the Asiatic beings. But when they fell under the influence of the European beings, and for the most part, as I've already told you, of the beings of the community France, then in view of the fact that these French beings have not the custom of going to the hammam, they also gradually ceased to use hammams, and thus this good custom, established for centuries among them, began little by little to disappear. Formerly, almost every Russian family had its own hammam, but recently, when I was in their chief place of existence, the former St. Petersburg, for the last time, and where at that time more than 2 millions of these Russian beings existed, there were only 7 or 8 of such hammams there. And even then, only those beings went to these hammams who were called their house porters and workmen. That is, beings who happened to come there to the capital from distant villages where the custom of going to the hammam, or as they sometimes call it, the bath, had not yet been quite wiped out. Now, as regards the main population of this capital, who consisted chiefly of the beings of what are called the ruling class, these beings, in recent times did not go to the hammam at all. And if any queer fellow were still sometimes from old habit to go, he would then try in every way that no one else in his caste should know about it. May crooked luck save him, otherwise such gossip would fly around about this bold fellow as would inevitably ruin the whole of his future career. To go to the hammam is now considered among beings belonging to the ruling class as very indecent and unintelligent. But indecent and unintelligent only because the contemporary most intelligent beings of their planet, who according to their understanding are the French, do not go to the hammam. These unfortunates do not know, of course, that these same French, thanks always to the same reasons, namely thanks to the abnormally established conditions of ordinary being existence, still but a few decades ago not only did not go to the hammam, but these French, particularly as they are called the intelligentsia, did not even wash themselves in the morning in order not to spoil their, at that time, fashionable artificial appearance, which was difficult to rearrange. Now, as regards the second of the good customs taken as an example by us, the fulfilling of which 2 centuries ago was still organically needed by every being of this community Russia, namely the custom of chewing keva after the use of the first being food. This custom already no longer exists there at all now among contemporary Russia. It must be remarked that at the present time this custom of chewing keva, without meanwhile understanding its purport, began to implant itself while I was still there among the beings dwelling on the continent called America, where the use of such keva, or as they have already called it by another name, chewing gum, is very widely spread and even takes on the dimensions of a great manufacturing branch of commerce there. Meanwhile, it is interesting to notice that the fundamental part of this American chewing gum is exported from Russia, namely from the locality called Caucasia. The beings dwelling in this locality do not even know why these mad Americans import this unnecessary root, good for nothing and for nobody. Of course, to no one of them does the thought even enter his head that these Americans importing this good-for-nothing root are indeed, though in a subjective sense, mad, yet in an objective sense they are merely, as they themselves express it, daylight robbers of the beings of this Russia. Well, my boy, in the same way, a mass of other good customs as well as moral habits, adopted in the course of centuries by these Russian beings, and already well fixed in the process of their ordinary existence during the last 2 centuries when these Russians became the object of influence of the European beings, began gradually to disappear. And instead of them, new customs and new moral habits were formed among them, which they have at the present time, such as the usage of kissing a lady's hand, being polite only with young ladies, looking at a wife before her husband with the left eye, and so on and so forth. It is necessary to emphasize with an impulse of regret that at the present time the same continues to proceed in the processes of the ordinary existence of the beings of all communities there on whatever continent it may be. I hope, my boy, that by now you may approximately picture to yourself and be satisfied about the question arising in your being, why, namely, in spite of the fact that there among those unfortunate favorites of yours, their species have risen and existed so long a time, could not those automatic being usages and instinctive habits have by now been formed, by which their existence, although even with the absence of objective consciousness, might flow more or less tolerably? I repeat, thanks to the said property, which only recently became fixed in their general psyche, it has already become natural at the present time, and as it were according to law, always either to influence another or to find oneself under the influence of others. In both cases, the results of the action of this peculiar property are obtained without any consciousness on their part, and even without their desire. From all that I've told you about this, that these contemporary Russians always follow the example of someone and imitate somebody, it can be clearly understood how much of the functioning of the data for being confrontative logical mentation is already deteriorated in the presences of terrestrial three-brained beings. In general, to follow the example of others, or set an example to others, is considered and cognized as fully reasonable and inevitably necessary everywhere in the universe among all three-brained beings. And that the three-brained beings of this large community Russia follow the example of the beings of the community France. This, on their part, is even very sensible. Why not take example from what is good? But these unfortunates, on account of all the said particular property of their psyche, and of still several other specific features of their strange character which has finally become fixed in them, thanks to the total disappearance from their common presences of the usage of sometimes actualizing being part of dog duty, became what is called adopters by compulsion, and began to follow the example also of what is bad, and even to reject their own good customs only because they do not exist elsewhere. They could not, for instance, consider even this, that conditions of ordinary existence among these French beings are perhaps being built up all the time abnormally, and therefore they had not yet had time to become aware of the necessity of sometimes, as in the given case, washing themselves in hammams or chewing keva after using the first being food. But to throw away good customs already acquired for the sole reason that they do not exist among the beings of this France, from whom they take example. This is already indeed genuine turkeyness. Although this strange peculiarity, which I've just called turkeyness, has already become inherent in almost all the three-brained beings who breed on this planet of yours, yet the manifestation and the results of it are noticed to a great extent among the three-brained beings who breed on the continent Europe. This I constated and understood later when I departed from St. Petersburg to travel in various countries of this continent Europe, on which this time I remained for a long while, and not for a short time as had happened on my former travels. And I had therefore time for observation and investigation of the finer details of the psyche, not only of the separate beings, but also of many together in all kinds of surrounding conditions. The form of external existence of all communities existing on this continent Europe is little distinguished from the external form of existence of the beings of that large community Russia. The form, however, of existence of the beings of the various groupings of this continent differs among themselves only in so much as, thanks to the accidental longer or shorter continuity of their existence of the given community, there had been time for certain good customs and instinctive habits to be automatically acquired and which became proper to the beings only of just this said community. Here, by the way, it is necessary to remark that the duration there of the existence of any community plays indeed a great role in the sense of the acquisition by beings of its good customs and instinctive habits. But unfortunately for all the three-brained beings of the whole universe of every degree of reason, the existence of every grouping of theirs, already more or less organized, is in general short-lived, thanks of course to that ever-same chief particularity of theirs, namely, periodic reciprocal destruction. As soon as good being usages for automatic existence begin to be established in the general process of any of their groupings, this terrifying process suddenly begins to proceed, and thus either these good customs and automatic habits acquired during centuries are totally destroyed, or the beings of the given grouping, thanks already to the mentioned property, fall under the influence of beings of another grouping who have nothing in common with those under whose influence they were before this, and therefore very soon all these customs and moral habits acquired during centuries are replaced by other new ones, which in most cases are premature and which in most cases are good for only, as is said, a day.